Right, tonight we welcome Elayne Klasson. We welcome back. And she's a woman, of course, as you know, that she's never done anything just halfway. She's had a career of scholastic achievements, contributions to society, bold moves, and a successful newspaper column. First of all, she was a few years ago, I think it was 2018? 19. She was the author of the National Jewish Book Award winning finalist and best-selling book, Love is a Rebellious Bird. Tonight, we are here to celebrate the release of her second book. It's decidedly different from the first. It's called The Earthquake Child, and having just started reading it, it'll rip your heart, I think. And I mean that in a good way. It's wonderfully written. We're very pleased to welcome Elayne Klasson.
Well, thank you. I just got to say that I've done a lot of bookstores, and Mike is the best. Answers emails, is encouraging. This is such a wonderful bookstore. We are so lucky to have this in our community. So thank you, Mike.
Thank you. I'm really excited because, as I told, I will spare everyone the details. It's kind of personal to me in terms of knowing somebody or a family member who has endured adoption and has had trouble with that, including Nick Welsh, the wonderful columnist for the Santa Barbara Independent. He just said that he was very intrigued by it because of the subject matter. And I know you're going to talk about it a little bit later, but I'm wondering why you picked adoption as your theme for this book.
Well, thanks, Mike. So, later in life, I feel like I don't have forever to get these words on paper. And so I wanted to pick the subjects that meant a lot to me. And, I'm very conscious of not wasting time. I think I'm above mid-70s, and I don't want to fool around. I mean, I have the energy and the time to write what I really care about. So my earlier book, Love is a Rebellious Bird, was about love and why we pick the people we pick. Why are we in the relationships we're in? Sometimes they're healthy, sometimes not so much. And I really felt like I wanted to explore this question of why we love the people we love. I guess it's an important question. We live with these relationships our whole lives. So then the second question that was burning and that I knew I had to write about was our children and the whole nature and nurture question. Because I don't think, and I'm going to talk a little about this, I have some written remarks, but I'll just briefly say, Mike, that I just know that every parent alive or everyone who has children in their life, even if they're not the parent, has asked the question of why are our kids the way they are? And if you have more than one kid, you really know that because you know that they're usually nothing like each other. And you have to ask these really important questions of where did they get that from? From Aunt Tilly, 2 generations back, or from their genetics, or from somehow some sort of bio involvement with drugs or alcohol. I mean, you have to wonder, but then you have to look at yourself and say, oh my God, what did I give that kid in my house and in my upbringing? So I was very passionate about trying to explore nature versus nurture with knowing that there's no answer, just as there's no answer as to why we pick the people we pick, because sometimes it's just like, what? We look at our friends and say, my goodness, why are they in that relationship? But who's to say about anybody else, and who's to say about why our children come out the way they do? And the third question or subject that really has me very passionate is the subject of friendship. And I've read books of Elena Ferrante, the wonderful Neapolitan quartet. I'm very passionate about trying to understand, just as we choose our mates, how do we choose the friends? And what is a long-term friendship, 30, 40, 50 years? What does that look like? And not from a Hallmark card view of, sweet friend, but from the passion that goes into long-term friendships. Sometimes there's jealousy, sometimes there's competitiveness, and sometimes there's just pure love, but sometimes there's other kinds of things that go on. So that's my next book, is to look at friendship, and I've started on that one already.
How long did this take you to write? You wrote during the pandemic, correct?
Yeah, but not this book.
Not this book.
This book is coming out after Love is a Rebellious Bird, but it was in fact started long before Love is a Rebellious Bird.
I'm actually talking about Earthquake Child.
Yeah, I wrote Earthquake Child before
You did?
I wrote Love is a Rebellious Bird. And it wasn't ready for prime time. It was, I was an adoptive mom, and it was really on my mind, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but I didn't get it published. I couldn't find a publisher. And so I started Love is a Rebellious Bird and did get that published. And then that publisher said, hey, didn't you tell me you have another book? So I went back to this earlier written book, Earthquake Child, did a lot more work and polishing, and then got that one published too.
Wow. It's an incredible story. It's juxtaposed your two books,
Yeah.
one after the
Yeah.
other.
Yeah, so I've lived with the Earthquake Child for 15 years. Written some of it before and some of it after I published Love is a Rebellious Bird.
When you're writing Love is a Rebellious Bird, was this book, it was still in you then?
It was, but I was on a very different, I threw myself completely into the love novel.
Okay.
I completely was caught up with these characters that were in a love relationship for 60 years. And I was living them. And, maybe there was some of, like, the fact that this Earthquake Child was painful to go back to, but I didn't go back to it until this was very finished and done. I have nothing else that I'm going to add or subtract. The book is in print, and I've heard that Gabriel Garcia Marquez tried to edit his books after he published them, but I can't even imagine. But so I went back then, and this was a much more painful book to write.
Yeah.
It's a pretty deep subject, and about a child and a young man, and that's painful stuff.
It's unique. You have 3 different perspectives, as you said earlier. So why don't you talk to us about it?
Okay, so it's dangerous to do 3 different points of view. I just finished. Did anybody read "Hello, Beautiful" by do you know how to say her name? Tagnalato. "Hello, Beautiful," great book, and it was an Oprah book. Oprah, you should only hear my words from over there in Montecito, but "Hello, Beautiful" uses the different points of view as well, and uses the 4 sisters and the man that they're involved with, and she's good. When editors look at your book and they see you changing point of view, they call it head bopping, like. Who's talking, So point of view is terribly important, and, I'm disciplined enough to know that. When I first started writing, I didn't really understand point of view. I would just say, well, then she said, and then he said. But you have to do point of view as only the things that character who's speaking or who's the narration of is seeing. And you can't have somebody else's view in there because that's not their point of view. So in this book, it felt it was really important to write 3 different points of view. And one was from the child himself, Joshua, who we meet as a young man. We'll go back and we'll meet him from birth on. But he obviously is a baby, can't tell us his point of view. But as he gets to be a teenager, we will definitely slam bang hear his very dramatic point of view, because he's a piece of work. And then I wanted to tell the story from the point of view of the birth mother, a woman who had to relinquish her baby. And in my book, she relinquishes at 3 days. And what could have possibly gone into a woman's life who has to relinquish her baby? I thought about it the day I met my adopted child, and I think about it now, and I think about it every time I hear stories of women and men who've relinquished their child. And so I wanted to tell the story as I imagined it, because I didn't really know in my own adoption case, I didn't know the birth mother's story about why she really chose to relinquish. So I created what I heard from various support groups I'd been in and from what little I knew about the the birth mother. So I created a story where a young woman really has run out of choices. And I'm getting my book in and my point of view in about adoption and abortion. I don't ostensibly say anything about abortion in this book, but I've been very offended by people including our Amy Comey Barrett, who makes the flat statements of, we don't need to have abortion because there's adoption. You know, all the babies can find a home. And I was so offended by that, because I feel like it's such an intense and important issue to take a child into your home and to adopt a child that's not of your own blood. I very much like the quote that I have at the beginning of the book, and I believe it with all my heart, which is, to be adopted is to be amputated and sewn back together. Whether or not you regain full function, there will always be scar tissue. And that's from A.M. Holmes, who wrote a beautiful book about adoption. And I believe in that scar tissue, whether you met your birth, you were relinquished by your birth mother at one day, whether you were relinquished at 7 years. The abrupt taking of a child from one home into another, not even smelling the senses that perhaps a baby might smell, and the various sensations that are felt by a newborn. I just think it's so important. And probably, if I have a political point of view, is don't treat it casually. This is big stuff. So that was very much how I felt passionately, and hopefully not totally telling anyone what to do. I just would never tell anyone what to do, but I've been asked by many people, knowing I had an adopted child, would you adopt? What do you think? You know, when an infertile couple is desperate and they want a baby, you know, who am I to tell them what the story is? So I just wanted to say, though, in my book and through my book, is that adoption is serious business, and not to be taken lightly.
Will you share some of your book with us?
Sure. So I'm going to say a little bit more about the book, and we covered most of it, and then I'm going to read you just a little bit from the first chapter. I've been told many times lately that people do not like long bookshop store readings, so I'm not going to bore you with that, but just I'll read you a small section. But I want to thank all of you for coming, and again have to thank my husband David, who is the incredible schlepper who gets everything here and has been so supportive, and who knew that this book had to be written. And so when it didn't work out the first time and I abandoned the book and I went into Love is a Rebellious Bird, he was pretty adamant about not letting my book sit there on my hard drive and in my desk. He said, finish that book. 100% supportive. I have a group of friends back home who listened back home, I still say Northern California's back home. They came over every Saturday afternoon and listened to chapters, not in formal editing, but just to tell me, hey, this is boring, this is not boring. So there was a lot of people that went into having the book see the light of day. So I know that the question that was leading me, as I mentioned earlier with Mike, is that why are our children so alike or so different from ourselves? And complicatedly, how are each of your children different from each other? Some of you, I don't know if any doctors are in the room today, but I had a lot of physicians at the opening that we did in San Ynez Valley, and they know the complications of DNA that go into our biology, yet no one really knows why do some of our kids like mayonnaise and the other gags at the side of it. More importantly, why do some kids seem to just flow through life comfortably, easily? They're just at ease with people, and yet others of our children, maybe from the same family, same mom and dad, they feel criticized at the slightest look or remark, that probably was never meant to hurt them. So I had a kid soon after, I had a kid I adopted soon after birth. I also had children from 2 different dads. So my first marriage, I had children from a man that I was divorced from. My second, then I had children from a man that I was widowed by. So I have children from different marriages. And then, because I'm slightly crazy, or because you'll hear in the book, I watched and studied all of them, and I adopted a child. Why? Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail about why I picked it. Just that, to my delight, with this first book published at age 72, it didn't drop into a deep, dark hole as I expected it to. So many books do. I mean, I was just floored. Finalist for the National Book Award. Got a lot of nice awards. Was a bestseller in Southern California. Independent booksellers. I mean, just to my amazement at age 72, some really good things happened. And it allowed me to discuss, as I said, the things that I really felt passionate about. I wanted to tell a truthful story about adoption, but I wanted to address how all children are the puzzle of being themselves. They're not clones of us. And I'm very conscious throughout about not wanting to come across pro or con about adoption. And the best way I knew how to do that was to tell anecdotes from this young man's life. So throughout the book, we watch Joshua grow. We meet him, in the beginning, we're going to meet him as a teenager. But then we're going to go back, and we're going to see Joshua as an adorable little blonde angel. We're going to see him as he goes through his various different passions and interests and collections, the way all little boys have collections. We find the unique circumstance that this child, Joshua, finds in the adoptive family. So mostly I created a picture of one particular boy from my heart. And after all this prenatal attention that I gave this one particular boy and the other adoptive parents I talked to plenty of adoptive parents. I went to a lot of support groups for adoptive parents. I heard a lot of stories. And after all that prenatal attention last week, he was born. This book was shockingly born. And I'm going to read a very small section, and that'll answer a little bit why people ask, why is the title called The Earthquake Child? And then I'd certainly love to answer questions. Please ask me anything. I love to discuss nature versus nurture. I obviously love to sign books. I'd like to answer anything about adoption and about the creation of this novel. But 2 weeks ago, I went to, I just saw it over here. I went to a reading by Abraham Verghese. Anyone read that one yet? This Doris Stopper, you loved it? I haven't opened it yet, but everyone says from the first sentence they love it. But I went to a reading by Abraham Verghese in Los Angeles a couple weeks ago. And what a guy he is. And he made a quote that I jotted down. Fiction is the great lie that tells the truth about how the world lives. So we read fiction to try to learn about our world, about other people. How do other people handle it? And yet it doesn't necessarily have to be the truth of our own life. It has to be the truth of our emotions. And one more quote I wanted to give. New York Times Magazine had an article on Lori Moore. Also has a new book out. Do we have you? Do you have her new book here?
Yeah, it should be right.
I Am Homeless If This Is Not My Home, which
Yeah.
people are also raving about. And she talks about the difference between memoir and fiction. Because Lori Moore really drew from her own life as well. Do you remember the cancer story she wrote about? All the people here are people like us. It was in New York. It was an amazing story about being on a cancer ward, a children's cancer ward. Painful, horrible situation, and yet everyone there was there because their child had cancer, and she wrote about it. And people said, how could you write about your child having cancer? And she said, you can make stuff up, you can embroider, you can get it all wrong, but it's that embroidering that makes your character not your mother, not your child. It's the embroidering that makes art bigger than your own story. And I love that because, yes, a lot of this is taken from the life of my adopted child, but I've embroidered a lot to tell a story that's not memoir, but I've tried to shape it into a form of a novel. So I'm going to read a little bit. Now that I think I found my glasses, what do I do with them now? Unbelievable. Okay, so the first chapter starts with Joshua. We're not going to hear about Joshua. We're going to start right away with the birth, the adoptive mother, Eleanor. 1989. The earthquake hit shortly after 5 o'clock in the afternoon on October 17th. When the trembling began, Eleanor was alone in the house, standing in front of a mirror in the upstairs bathroom. The weather in Los Altos had been still and warm all day. A bit of humidity in the air, unusual for Northern California in October. In years to come, she called this earthquake weather. The papers reported that the Loma Prieta earthquake was a violent collision of tectonic plates in a previously ignored section of the mighty San Andreas Fault. Located 50 miles to the south of San Francisco, it measured 7.1 on the Richter scale, lasting a mere 15 seconds. However, time did strange things during those 15 seconds, expanding and undulating. And during that brief time, Eleanor had a powerful and surprising thought. Even in the midst of her terror, Eleanor Russell realized how much she wanted another child. As the shaking continued, Eleanor feared the whole house would come down, its wood beams and plaster walls collapsing on her. She feared she'd be buried under the rubble, with no one arriving in time to find her, and she felt the frail flesh and blood humanness of her own body. For the first time in life, she thought she might be facing death. On that Tuesday afternoon, she put her hands to her belly and felt a longing that she could never adequately explain afterward. It didn't matter that she already had 2 teenage children. They were from her first marriage, another lifetime ago. She wanted a baby, one that was hers and Ron's. She thought she had made peace with this urge for another child, but it was jostled loose by the shaking of the earth. Los Altos was a community of concerned and involved parents. Even on an evening with a relatively short and innocuous agenda, 15 people might attend the school board meeting. She'd been fixing her hair and makeup, getting ready for the monthly school board meeting. Eleanor was president of the Los Altos Union Elementary School Board. Each time she stepped up to the raised semicircular platform with its smooth sweeping desks and microphone placed in front of each comfortably padded chair, she was self-consciously aware of her appearance. She fussed in front of the mirror, not for the other 9 members of the school board, but for the audience who might be sitting in front of her. But the school board meeting never took place. With eyeliner applicator poised in midair, she heard the first deep rumbling. It sounded as if a heavy truck were passing the house, but Eleanor and Ron lived in the hills where there was no truck traffic. The rumbling was immediately followed by a huge rocking. The entire house swayed from side to side. From the upstairs bathroom, she heard the joints twist and moan, a sickening sound. As she gazed into the mirror, she saw with horror that the heavy pine armoire directly behind where she stood was tipping forward, heading for her. She stepped to the right just in time to watch the wooden piece crash with such force that the burgundy tiles covering the countertop cracked and the mirror above shattered. The doors flew open, the wood splintered, towels and sheets flew off the shelves. Eleanor stared at that fallen armoire for a second. Still, hearing her house torquing and cracking, she ran from the bathroom, fearing she'd not make it outside before the roof collapsed. She wondered if this was the big one. Was this the one in which the world as she knew it would disappear? She began descending the stairs to utter quiet. However, when she reached the landing, the house began to groan and move again. At the landing, her favorite piece of artwork rested on a heavy marble pedestal. It was called In the Evening, a green patinaed bronze of an elegantly draped female sculpture sculpted by a famous artist. She and Ron had bought the sculpture 7 years earlier when they felt flush and romantic on their honeymoon, a time when all, including a baby, seemed possible. Now the pedestal and the bronze atop it swayed in the instant she ran past it. The heavy sculpture slid off its base, hitting her hard in the knee, opening a nasty gash. Okay. In the first 2 years of her marriage, she'd had 2 miscarriages, one after the other. They'd been painful and she grieved. After both, it seemed everyone she knew or passed down the street was pregnant. When Ron's sister, who she loved, had a baby, the same day Eleanor was lying in bed recovering from her second miscarriage, she could barely muster congratulations. She blamed herself for the second miscarriage. Perhaps she tried to get pregnant too soon after the first. Perhaps she'd been working too hard. She was ambitious, taking on too many committee assignments at the university. After the miscarriages, there was a complete failure to conceive. Finally, Dr. Baden, her fertility doctor, said he had little hope she could have a baby without complicated interventions. He determined she was already approaching menopause. At 41, this was young, but early menopause ran in the family. Think of it like a fruit stand, Dr. Baden said when she was trying to conceive. In the morning, the apples and pears are out front, displayed in rows, each one shiny and juicy. But by the end of the day, when the fruit seller is ready to close up shop, there are only a few pieces remaining. The ones that are left are a bit bruised and shriveled. That's the way your eggs are. There aren't many remaining, and those few aren't particularly viable. What a depressing image, thought Eleanor, her eggs all shriveled and non-viable. The day they left Dr. Baden's office, Ron had put his arm around her and said gently, it was okay. He loved his stepchildren, Max and Laura. He didn't want her to undergo the radical treatments, surgery, massive amounts of hormone that getting pregnant would involve. He didn't think Eleanor could bear another miscarriage either. The odds were bad and it wasn't worth it. He'd been in Max and Laura's life since they were 7 and 10. Now they were 14 and 17. They were terrific kids and they were enough. But Eleanor didn't believe him. Even before the earthquake, it grieved her that they hadn't had a baby together. Although she said yes to having children because she wanted to marry Ron, she hadn't been completely sure at first. Yet as she watched Ron become a warm and generous stepfather, she thought he deserved to have a child, a baby they could raise together. It was just like him to say it wasn't a loss, because he asked so little for himself. So that's a little bit why it's called the Earthquake Child. And I would love if you have any questions.
Just waiting.
Were you there at the Loma Prieta?
Yeah. Somebody asked that too. Have I ever experienced an earthquake? Yeah, 1989.
Crazy quake.
Yeah, it was the quake. It was the baseball Major League
World Series.
the World Series
Yeah.
quake, the bridge quake, and it was traumatic. Were you?
Yeah, I have a question about, you were talking earlier about fictionalized memoir, and there's a new term that I've been hearing, autofiction. Does that mean anything to you in terms of this book?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of new terms because I think the line between fiction and memoir is definitely getting blurred. I wouldn't call it that because I have created so many made-up characters.
Okay.
And the woman who won the Nobel Prize for Literature last year, the French woman,
Annie
Ernaux.
Annie
Ernaux.
Ernaux, correct, thank you. Annie Ernaux's books, which are completely taken from her life and which are so fascinating, she calls some of them fiction and she calls some of them memoir. I don't even think she bothers to try to, so that maybe would be more what you're talking about, autofiction, but it is a word that's used. I think the whole area of memoir is really being explored.
Yeah.
I just don't think that this is memoir.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Hi, yes, Sarah?
How does your son feel about this book, and has he read it?
Yeah, he hasn't read it. He isn't much of a reader. I asked him very early on if he would consider writing the epilogue. I would have loved to have his input, and he didn't want to. We talked over a few things. I wanted to make sure that there were a few instances, some are made up and some are actual, that he was comfortable with. And he had a few things. He said, Mom, you're not going to put that in. And I said, no, I won't put that in. But he gets it. I mean, he's going to be at the first event that I do up in Northern California, and I don't know that people are going to know it's my son or not. But I asked him if he's going to be uncomfortable with that, and he said, no. I mean, he understands that. I really hope that this is a book that is helpful to people who are part of Adoption Triangle, and so far, so good.
And how old is he?
He's now in his 30s. Yeah. But I think, like, with a lot of troubled kids, the teenage years are pretty, that's when a lot of acting out happens. So a lot of this book takes place in his teenage years and going into his 20s. But it's not, I mean, he is not, my son is not Joshua. I have to kind of remind people of that. But definitely the experience of adoption and the experience of working with a birth mother and the whole process of being in support groups definitely was my own experience.
The one that you talked about, that you read, and the eggs and talking about the falling fruit and that. Do you think a lot of that with young moms leads to adoption?
Yeah, absolutely.
That what you said about after the quake, that yearning was so strong. Do you think that now that's what's pushing adoption?
I mean, who knows why this incredible emotion happens for women about wanting children. And I think, we talked about this a little bit at the last event I was at. I don't know if men perceive the same amount of longing for a child if they don't have it. It's usually, and let's look at nature and nurture on that one too. It's usually a woman who feels this passionate sense of wanting a child, and if she is dealing with infertility, it becomes a very big issue. And adoption, is maybe for many, many, many adoptive parents their last resort. Some people just adopt because of some, higher calling or, religious effect. But I think most of the adoptive parents I ran into at various support groups were people who were facing infertility and really, really wanted a baby before it was too late. And, for women, we have this cutoff point, less so for men.
Sure.
Yeah.
One more question.
Can you talk a little more about the next book?
Well, you know about it, Lori, because it's related to Sicily, and I went to Sicily with a group of 5 women who have been best friends. We have been best friends for 40 years, and it seemed to me that the vehicle of traveling with a group of best friends became a really good way to describe marriage, describe friendship. And though I do want to explore each of the 5 women, but I'm using traveling around the island of Sicily as a chance to explore this friendship. And I read that they were all here for my book launch last Friday, and I read them the first chapter, and no one got too mad at me. Thank you all for coming. You've been just great.
Elayne Klasson, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.